Well, joining me now is Catherine Haddon, who's a Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government. Catherine, thank you for joining us here on the BBC News Channel and BBC World today. Just explain to us what Boris Johnson is trying to do with this, what the process would be that would lead to the prorogation or suspension of Parliament ahead of a Queen's speech.
Well, we were due to have a break anyway for at least 3 weeks while the parties went on conference, although there was some talk about whether they would remove that and actually avoid sort of suspending Parliament in that way. But they've obviously decided to do this particular one because it means that they don't have to have the same kind of motion that MPs could possibly use to try and get hold of time in Parliament and to try and hijack the government's agenda. It also extends the amount of time that they take now. We were due to have a Queen's speech anyway and to have prorogation happening, but to do it right now, given everything that's going on, given obviously the emphasis that is going to be on Parliament in the efforts of some MPs to try and stop no-deal Brexit, it does seem like a very obvious move to try and cut down the time available to anti-no-deal MPs to be able to do something about it.
Well, on that point, do those MPs, many of whom met yesterday to come up with their plan, do they actually have time now? If we were looking at this timetable that the government seems to be working on, do those MPs opposed to a no-deal Brexit have time to stop this?
It's very difficult to know. Previously, back in the spring, when there were efforts to try and take hold of the order paper, control business and get legislation through, first of all, it took a long time for MPs to decide what they wanted to do. It took them over 2 months to work out what kind of legislation. You assume they'd have that in mind now. We get this sense that there's a great deal of a better amount of coordination amongst the opposition parties on what they want to do. They can get legislation through very quickly. One of the key things might be the House of Lords, where it's possible for government peers to try and slow down the process and try and use up time because the rules there work differently. And we're also hearing about a number of new appointments to the Lords, so that could be an effort to try and slow that down further. So they're really going to be struggling to be able to find time. But the same is true for the government. If it did get a deal through, the time available to do anything about it is now extremely short, and even for no-deal preparation, the time there is very difficult for the government as well.
What is being set up here, and I think probably most people will agree on this, no matter what side of the political argument they're on, it is an absolutely almighty parliamentary battle in the days and weeks ahead, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think what this makes clear is that showdown is going to kick in properly next week. We heard in the last week or so a lot of noises about whether or not Boris Johnson would be able to find a deal, was making progress possibly with EU leaders on what he might be able to do there. And there was some speculation that might stop Conservative MPs wanting to go to a showdown with their own government too early, and that they'd actually give the government time. I think this changes that. I think this means that there will be a much greater showdown next week, and we could see things move very quickly.
OK, Catherine, thank you very much for your thoughts on this breaking story today. Catherine Haddon, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government.